Get ready to take a flamethrower to the official narrative and learn what the elites don't want you to know. You're listening to The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. It's episode 2600 of The Tom Woods Show, and I am joined today by Zach Weissmuller, who is senior producer at Reason, and Guy Swann, who's both of whom are returning to the show. Guy is with Bitcoin Audible, a podcast I just listened to the other day, and an episode specifically on the topic we're covering today, which is Ross Ulbricht. Now, in yesterday's episode, we talked about the details surrounding the pardon and the months and days leading up to that actual event. But in this episode, I want to go into the Ross case itself, because there are a lot of people now who are telling us, we're getting to be treated, we're being treated to the same narrative about Ross from years and years ago is now rearing its head again, because sometimes it's people who don't like Trump and they want to embarrass him by saying he pardoned a terrible person. Other people have followed the case, or at least superficially, and just think, because if you do a Google search, Ross sounds like a bad guy to some people. And so a lot of, I think, reasonable people who have open minds want to know what's the real truth of the matter. We've heard this said about him. We've heard that said about him. What's the real truth of the matter? So I wanted to get to the bottom of that. Also, because now that he is free, he's going to want to reintegrate himself into society. And it would be nice if he could do so without every time he turns around having the same old charges against him raised by people. So I thought we want to hit this head on. So first of all, Zach, let me start with you. I thought, as I said in the episode the other day, that I did think Trump was going to free him, but I thought he would do so without much fanfare. I thought he would bury it. I thought his attitude would be, libertarians will find out about it one way or the other. That's what matters. But there's no need to have a lot of fanfare, because Ross's story is not normie friendly. A lot of people would look at Silk Road and say, well, you shouldn't have an online marketplace where people can buy and sell things they want. I understand why that appeals to libertarians, but I don't particularly like that idea. So I could have imagined him just burying it. But instead, he posted this very over-the-top social media post about how pleased he was to do it, and that the people who were going after Ross were scum, and this whole thing. So that was a surprise. But I guess what I want to ask Zach, and then Guy, if you want to jump in, feel free, is how do you make this case to somebody who isn't starting off with libertarian principles, who thinks, it's not a net positive in society for people to have access to a marketplace like this where they can purchase things that are potentially harmful?
Yeah. By the way, I was also surprised by the proclamation. I thought it would be, first of all, I thought there would be a lot more of a fight. I was expecting various DEA adjacent and DOJ adjacent operatives around him to be pressuring him not to do it. And he just kind of flipped them all the bird and did it. And that's a great thing. And I think speaks to the increasing sway that the libertarian movement has had in Trump world. So that's a positive sign. To your question about the social effects of drugs being, conveniently shipped to your doorstep, I think the first thing that comes to people's mind is like the worst of the worst. Things like fentanyl, right? Where you can take just like a little bit of that powder and it's lights out. And there's been, very sad stories of sons and daughters that happening to them. And a lot of those the majority of those stories have happened after the Silk Road was shut down. And so fentanyl is what is driving the overdose epidemic right now. And that exploded around 2015, 2016, 2 years after Ross was arrested. And the reason that it exploded is because fentanyl as a street drug is a byproduct of prohibition, basically. People got addicted to opioids for various reasons that we can or cannot get into. They cracked down on the pain pills. They went to heroin. Then the cartels found that it was more profitable to smuggle in fentanyl. And so whether or not the Silk Road or websites like it exists, this problem exists. And shutting down the website did not get rid of it. In fact, it only got worse afterwards. And the website, at the very least, gave people who were into that sort of thing, at least there was some sort of reputational mechanism. It's kind of like Yelp for drugs, where you could be like, this guy's selling bad stuff, that guy's selling pure stuff. At least it's kind of reducing the bad outcomes. It's a harm reduction tool, essentially. So we might not like it. I don't like that fentanyl exists. I don't like that people are addicted to opioids. But cracking down on the Silk Road clearly didn't eradicate that problem.
Yeah, Guy, what are your thoughts on this?
So I would say a couple of things, just on the idea of the context of like drugs, or trying to explain to a normie that, why should they care about this case or anything that happened in it? And really the big thing is that, like, if our goal is to reduce harm and to reduce violence to the people, the drugs won the war on drugs. Like, so obviously. We've spent trillions upon trillions of dollars. Like, millions of lifespans worth of resources have been wasted on this. The drug problem is worse. The violence is worse. The addiction is worse. Everything is worse. And we have wasted trillions and trillions of dollars getting here. What Ross made, and what was the intent of the website, as explicitly stated and explained and spread through the Bitcoin community at the time, was, what if this could be fixed in a peaceful way? What if we could do an experiment? What if we could stop this unbelievable, disgusting waste of resources and life and incredible amount of violence, and just try to do it peacefully? And he made a peaceful marketplace online in which people could engage in simple drug transactions. Understand, like 80 to 90% of what was even traded on the website was literally small, like consumer amounts of marijuana. Like something that I can literally go to the store and get now. So this website runs something that is literally legal in most of the country, and where it is not illegal, nobody cares. And he was put, and for this which he was charged for this which he was found guilty of, running the website in which other people mostly just bought marijuana, he was put in jail for 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Now, I want to mention something else that you said about, like, getting someone the truth of this because the view has been so skewed. I don't think that's the goal. The goal is not the truth. We don't know what the truth is. We never did. They don't know what the truth is. Nobody has any idea what the truth is. Curtis Green, who was an admin and who was a defender of Ross and one of the people who supposedly Ross hired to kill, doesn't believe anybody has anything even close to the truth of the matter. He says this was an incredibly complicated, multifaceted situation in which there were tons of different people involved. There were tons of fake accounts. There were lots of questions as to whether or not any of the data or any of the information that was even presented was real or if it was changed. And one thing that I think the big thing in the entire thing about this case that makes it such a travesty of justice is the fact that the two federal investigators that were involved in this for years, who were active on the website, were unbelievably corrupt. They were fabricating evidence. They were trying to cover things up. They were having conversations with themselves. They were running dozens of fake accounts that we know of, and there are tons that we do not know of. And there's a lot of fake accounts that did a lot of things that don't seem to line up with anything that happened in the real world, and nobody knows about, and nobody bothered to care to even look into it or figure out what actually happened. And none of this, and there were no deaths resulted in this. The only thing that they get to point to is that there were a couple of people who OD'd, people who did things to themselves by buying drugs and sticking it into their own body from a website in which Ross did not even send it to them. He was not the executor of this. It was the website, and other people were trading on this with each other and shipping goods. And the idea that this was a fair trial, that this was justice, that this was something that was a reasonable sentence, even if he was fully guilty of everything, is bonkers. It's bonkers. Ghislaine Maxwell, decades of child prostitution, of capturing, imprisoning, and delivering children to politicians and celebrities, to rape, got 20 years in prison. 20. And the dude who ran a website and was only charged and guilty of running a website for drugs, for marijuana, in which guns weren't even allowed, because he was explicitly nonviolent. Child pornography, not allowed. Things that explicitly harmed people, not allowed, because this was a libertarian experiment. 2 life sentences plus 40 years. We're talking about they believe that this is punishable to the tune of like 10 Ghislaine Maxwells. That's insane.
Yeah, I mean,
it's insane.
I think that there's something, that point you're bringing up at the end there about the disparate treatment for someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, or, name your, kind of connected, dark, shadowy figure. I think that probably explains a lot why this case resonated with Trump after what the kind of lawfare that he had been through. He saw the fingerprints on the case. And I'm sure we're going to get into what some of that corruption and those dirty fingerprints were. But I think Trump just intuitively understood there's something dirty and wrong about this case. However you feel about drugs being sold online, however you feel about the dark web, there's something wrong. And that, like, we don't trust the FBI, right? We don't trust these agencies to treat things fairly. And this clearly, like, the sentence was outrageous. Ross has apologized for, on the fentanyl issue. He has expressed regret he said, I wouldn't do it again. I'm sorry about the people who OD'd. I think I agree with Guy that I think that there's more of a personal responsibility issue at play. But, that for a guy to go in at age 29 and spend the rest of his natural life in prison for this, there's something, deeply wrong and off about it.
Hey everybody, your old friend Woods is about to save you a bundle. I'd like to tell you about my friends at Federated Computer, who are changing the way businesses buy software. We all need software to run our businesses, but the best business software doesn't have to cost thousands of dollars each month. The typical Federated Computer customer saves 75% or more on their software bill and gets great software, top-notch customer service and support, and a software solution that is uniquely installed for your business and without any surveillance or breaches of privacy. For example, if you use Google for email, Salesforce for CRM, Slack for team chat, ListMonkey for customer communications, and Airtable for data management, with a team of 10, you'd save $9,000 per year on software costs switching to Federated Computer. And what is wild, the cost of Federated Computer doesn't grow as your team grows. You can use your Federated Computer savings to grow your business rather than feed the woke Silicon Valley software companies. The Federated Computer team invented computing in the cloud. Now they're taking a hammer to the ridiculously high prices of business software and have many, many satisfied customers to prove they deliver. Federated Computer has been a longtime supporter of the Tom Woods Show, and they're offering 30% off their already low prices when you use coupon code WOODS. Go to www.federated.computer to begin to save 75% or more on your monthly software costs. That's www.federated.computer. These folks are going to do you a big, big favor. Check them out. Well, so there are two things that I think we want to get into more detail about. One of them is that whole murder for hire charge, but let's hold that off because, as we know, that was not part of the legal proceeding. But what can we say? And Guy, I know the level of detail you've got this in, but for the average person who just wants the gist of it, what can we say was, so first of all, we can say that the the punishment is vastly disproportionate to the alleged offense. That's one thing. But are there other aspects of the proceedings themselves, the actual case against him, that are objectionable or irregular?
So I would say one of the, and it's important to have a comparison too, because if you're comparing it to itself, you don't really have any measure of exactly how absurd and unfair the proceedings were. So think about O.J. Simpson, and who seemed to, in all accounts, be very, very guilty for what happened. And there was just a slew of evidence for it. And yet the reason, one of the very important reasons why he got off, was because they uncovered a recording of one of the police officers who collected the evidence going on a basically racist rant against black people. And that this was considered damning to any and all evidence that was presented, because you have an incredible bias, you have a systemic hate in someone who is putting these pieces together in order to prosecute and basically punish someone for the rest of their life. That you are in a position to destroy them because of what you dislike about them rather than because of the truth. And the most egregious case of this, or situation of this in Ross's case, is that not only, and just we'll ignore for a second right now that many people had access to the DPR account. Dread Pirate Roberts was the admin, the main admin account, the runner of the show. And this account was definitely changed hands multiple times. Definitely multiple people were helping to run and keep this in check. And Curtis Green, again, one of the admins on the website, even said specifically that even for a short time, he had access to the DPR account and was in fact doing things, quote unquote, as DPR. So there was already like a huge, okay, we don't even know exactly who and what is happening with the DPR account. All we can do is link things specifically to the DPR account at some particular time. But the real problem is that the source of so much of the evidence are blatantly corrupt federal officers. And the whole reason this blew up, and everything about even about the murder for hire stuff, all of it, the whole reason that any of this even played out is because Curtis Green, when he turned informant when he was captured as someone as part of the website and turned informant, he ended up turning over admin keys and presented in front of, this was on January 25th, I believe, 2000 and, what was this? 12, 13? I can't remember exactly which year it is, but when all this was blowing up. And on that day, on January 25th, he was presenting to them, and Sean Bridges and Carl Force, who were the two officers that are so deeply tied into every bit of this, were actually present at this disclosure. And as soon as Curtis Green released and went through showing how to reset pins, how to edit things on the website, how to reset passwords of different accounts, how to change vendor status or a user status to a vendor, and all of these different things to essentially edit, to have run-of-the-mill of the entire website. Suddenly, dozens of people were hacked accounts that afternoon, the same afternoon on January 25th. Dozens of people were hacked. More than $1 million worth of Bitcoin were stolen and taken from people, and it sent everyone into chaos, because here is this just marketplace where people are operating, and suddenly there is somebody causing chaos, that people are getting blackmailed, people are getting extorted. There's essentially ransom on people's livelihoods, that we are going to turn you over to the cops. We're going to have your life destroyed. You're going to send me this amount of Bitcoin. All of these accounts have been created in which these officers were running. The Bridges even created a corporation, a Quantum International Investments LLC, in which he set up with Fidelity, because there was a conversation within a couple of days of this happening in which emails between Carl Force and Sean Bridges are asking, how do you liquidate a whole bunch of Bitcoin? And so he set up an account called Quantum International Investments with Fidelity. And basically all of those Bitcoins went through that account, and every single wire, all of the dollars being wired were being wired from Mt. Gox. And this ties back to so much of the other information about like who the other people were who were possibly in charge of and or had access to the DPR account, because it was known at the time, or it was known later, that at the time, almost upwards to a half of what was going through the Mt. Gox exchange was actually from the Silk Road. And Mark Karpeles, the actual lead investigator at the time, which was not Carl Force or lead investigator for the prosecutors, actually believed that Mark Karpeles and Ashley Barr were the two people that they needed to be really focused on, even though there was obvious, like Ross had created this. So they knew Ross was involved. They knew that there were multiple people here, and he was very interested in Mark Karpeles. And Mark Karpeles was running the Mt. Gox exchange and was attached to tons of different websites and things that were going around in the Bitcoin space. So it actually makes a lot of sense that he would be related to this. And there was a lot of information that suggests he did. And he even met with prosecutors at some point very shortly before Ross Ulbricht was arrested. And during that, what we know about that conversation or that meeting is that he said he would give over another target in exchange for immunity. And within, I think, a week, maybe 2 weeks of that, Ross Ulbricht was arrested in the cafe, having been logged in. And so there's a mountain of details to get into. But here's the crazy thing. Sean Bridges and Carl Force had administrative access to the website. Curtis Green handed it to them. Curtis Green even says in a podcast that he genuinely thinks that some of his conversations have been edited, that things that were presented as evidence were actually, he said, obviously, allegedly, like we don't know. He said, I do not remember having this. I do not remember saying this or having this part of this conversation. And it just so happens that it aligned with Carl Force's or his account. I think it was the Knob account, because there were a bunch of different accounts related to this. Again, they're running like a bunch of different fake accounts at this point. That it actually aligned with the narrative that was trying to blackmail the DPR account at the time. So the Dread Pirate Roberts account was being blackmailed. And it was aligning to, like, as if Curtis Green was the one trying to do the blackmail and was responsible for all of these hacks. And so if they have, again, we're talking about the fact that like every piece of digital data here is now coming into question because we have two people who are fabricating and lying and stealing from all of these people and trying to set up fake accounts and fake companies to move all of this money through, are at the heart of where all of this data came from. And when Curtis Green handed over that admin access to Bridges and Force, Carl Force was actually one of the accounts. So he is the explicit source of the account that was supposedly killing Curtis Green. So he is the one, they have the master key to all of this. They are the source of all of the data related to this. None of this was allowed to be discussed in the trial. None of it. So they are not allowed to call into question the very nature of the investigation that has so many inconsistencies and so much false information and so much faking and theft and violence around it from the officers involved in the investigation and providing evidence. And that, I think, I do not see how you have a fair case. I do not see how you can have anything close to reasonable doubt or the truth if you cannot discuss the trustworthiness of the liars and the thieves and the corrupt officers that are the source of so much of the evidence and so much of what happened during this case and during that entire debacle. So that's what I just think is just insane. And this is glossed over because everybody's like, none of the murder for hire stuff even matters because not only was he not charged or indicted with it, I think it's specifically because they thought they knew that somebody was going to be able to bring in all of this evidence and call into question the entire investigation because they had to keep Sean Bridges and Carl Force out of the courtroom. They had to make sure that the jurors did not hear a wink of all of the corruption that went on during this entire situation.
Hey folks, quick message from Virtual Storefronts. If you own a local business and you know you should probably be online, but you have no idea where to start and you're sure you can't afford it, then Virtual Storefronts is for you. They help local businesses get online faster and quicker than ever before, and they focus on getting local results in the search engines. You just set it and forget it. You set up keywords that match items you sell, and the Virtual Storefronts backend handles the rest. No maintenance or upkeep required. So you name it. Restaurants, boutiques, salons, farmers markets, food trucks, art galleries, gift shops, event services, lawyers, insurance agents, cleaning, landscaping, whatever you can dream up. Any locally owned, non-major franchise that is 12 or fewer locations business that maintains regular hours and serves the public in a local area is qualified to create, maintain, and communicate with the public with a storefront at virtualstorefronts.com. Absolutely fantastic. Check it out. Get all the details at virtualstorefronts.co. That's virtualstorefronts.co. I want to go on, but Zach, if you want to jump in, feel free to do that.
Yeah, I think that the important thing to keep in mind here is that Ross, the government wanted to have it both ways, and they kind of did get it both ways. For all the reasons the guy just outlined, they didn't want to bring this into the courtroom. If they had brought it into the courtroom, it would have opened up questions about corruption. It would have been questions about where did this Bitcoin go? Oh, did it go into the account of this federal agent? It would have opened up questions about how did you get into Silk Road's server in Iceland without a warrant? And if we're asking that question, can we do a forensic examination of the data on the copy of that server that you got? None of that happened. And that's the stuff that would have needed to happen in a trial to adjudicate whether the chat logs and the so-called diaries that implicate Ross in the murder for hire or tampered with, we simply don't know. And yet, the judge referenced these charges in her sentencing to bolster the justification for this extreme sentence. But we all know that the sentence was not about Ross being a wannabe hitman. This sentence was about making an example of someone who started a web that the government saw as a threat to its power to regulate the flow of drugs, and I think even more importantly, information in this country. And that is why Ross got a double life sentence with no parole. It wasn't because he was accused of killing someone. It was because of what he created. And she made that abundantly clear in her sentencing statement when she said that he came from a place of privilege and he felt like he didn't have to follow the rules of this country. It was a I'm going to put you in your place type of sentence. And all this murder for hire talk, it amounts to nothing until we're able to see a case in full, and they didn't bring it.
If they wanted a case against it, they should have charged him with it. They should have allowed the court to actually make an assessment on it. But what they wanted to, like you said, they wanted to be able to put him in prison for it without having a trial for it. That's exactly what they got.
So supposing you run across somebody who says, why would you favor pardon to this guy because of, and then they go and they talk about murder for hire, and you've got their attention for like a minute.
Mm.
How do you answer that?
I would say, what murder for hire? It was not proven, A, and B, it was never carried out. It was a scheme that was created by an undercover agent in order to capitalize on a moment of crisis in the Silk Road when a bunch of Bitcoin was being siphoned. And the supposed target of that hit, Curtis Green, says he doesn't believe that Ross was the person who ordered the hit, and he wanted Ross to be freed from prison. If he believed that this guy wanted to murder him, would he be advocating for his release from prison? Makes you think.
But they can say, okay, it's true he wasn't charged with it, and so therefore he wasn't convicted, but it does look like the Dread Pirate Roberts account we can find, it seems like consented to this.
Yes.
I would say, I would say, then if you want to put someone in prison for that, you charge them and you prove it in a court of law. Like, you have a trial. Like, that's in the Constitution. Like, you don't get to skip it because you read an article or you heard a headline like 10 times and you're pretty sure that it's right. Like, you charge him and you prove it in a court of law. You don't weasel your way through that and then put him in prison and then throw away the key and say that, well, you know, we heard this thing and that would be bad if that thing was true. And so let's let him die in prison. Prove it.
If they had brought the case and proven that Ross Ulbricht was the person behind the Dread Pirate Roberts account, which we should make note is a Princess Bride reference for a character that is inhabited over and over by different people. If that had been proven in court, we would be having a different... I wouldn't even want to say we'd be having a different conversation. We wouldn't be having this conversation because we'd all be in agreement that somebody who orders murderous hits should be in prison.
I would also ask, like, what's the sentence for that? Is it in which nobody dies? Is it double life plus 40 years? Because I don't know. What's the if he got a court case and that turned out to be, you know, a jury of his peers, he got a fair shake. Like, what's the sentence of that? Because right now he was charged and convicted of running a website in which people voluntarily bought and sold drugs, and he got 2 life sentences plus 40 years. And they got to hang something on him that he did not get a trial for. That's, I don't see how you can justify this as honest justice. It just seems insane to me. Like, everything just smells wrong to me.
Well, suppose you're Ross Ulbricht, and now you're free, and you have a couple of months to prepare yourself for, let's say, making the interview circuit. Are you going to be concerned to dredge up some of these old accusations against you just to clear the air, or you just ignore them and move on?
I would think that if that is his plan to kind of embrace his iconic status and do the interview circuit and, talk to people, then you've got to address it. This is one of the reason you're asking us these questions is because it's what every person who has supported the Free Ross movement or supported him not being in prison for the rest of his life, it's one of the first 2 questions everybody is asked. So I think he has to address it on some level and explain what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think you get around it. And it would be interesting to hear his side of it.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear the full story if he wanted to.
I'd like to hear the whole story.
I also don't. But he served 12 years in prison, so I don't blame him for staying out of the spotlight and not wanting to either.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, let's take a minute to thank our sponsor, Persist SEO. If you're getting buried by your competition online, then build your brand, your reputation, and your lead flow with digital marketing by Persist SEO. If you're a small local business trying to compete against large companies in the service industry, then increase your visibility with Persist SEO. What if you have low or no leads coming in on a consistent basis? Well, then website search engine and conversion optimization can help move the needle to a more prosperous business model for you. Are you tired of cold calling and networking? Use your website as a lead generation engine. What if you're not showing up for your services in the search engines? Well, get found with Persist SEO expert search engine optimization. All you have to do is call 770-580-3736 or visit them at ineedseo.help for a free website audit and consultation. That's 770-580-3736 or ineedseo.help. But he's had plenty of time to think about what how he would account for everything and allay everybody's fears. I still want to, as an author, I have a natural prejudice in favor of books. I still want to read his book.
I would be fascinated with a book. That's exactly right. Same here. Yeah. I'm a reader myself. So.
Tell everything that happened. I'd like two books. I'd also like a book by his mother about the time that he was in prison. And because I think, if we're being honest with ourselves, now that Ross is out, I think we can say it. I think most of us thought this is hopeless. Like we want to free Ross because it's the right thing to do, and we love Lynn, and we hate to see her heartbroken, but it's probably not going to happen, and it sucks. And I hate that this mom has to be miserable the rest of her life. It just doesn't seem right. And yet, suddenly it happened. But I think for most of the time, because I thought the only thing that's going to fix this is a presidential pardon. I don't think there's any other way around it. Unless he escapes and then he's on the run the rest of his life. I don't think that's happening. So we had to comfort her, but yet with this sick sense of doom that there was absolutely nothing that could be done. So it's almost like when the Cold War ended, no one had planned for this because it just seemed like a feature of reality that there's nothing you could do about. And then all of a sudden, holy cow, it's over. And now this thing is over.
There's a really profound lesson there. It sounds banal, but it is profound, which is like, don't give up on these things.
Yeah.
And there are others. There are other causes out there that seem bliss that we recommit to. Think about
now you can say, look, if Ross got out, then this other cause could come true.
Yes. And that has been the sort of, I'm not anyone who follows me knows I'm not a Trump shill, but that is an upside of the Trump phenomenon, is like it opened up all these weird and some exciting new possibilities of, there are new political possibilities that we didn't think were in any way plausible, and now maybe it actually is.
Yeah, I think it's because in this case you have a guy who he doesn't always exercise it the way I would want, but he's willing to do things that other people wouldn't consider. Like there's nobody else in the Republican Party who was going to, who has been a nominee for president over the past however many years, except Ron Paul, I guess, who would have considered this. It wouldn't have even crossed his mind. But that's not how Trump is. Like he does consider the things that that
or
other
a
people
Democrat
don't.
For that. Like think about why didn't a Democrat do this? Democrats are supposed to be skeptical of the drug war and should be able to look at this as a miscarriage of justice, right? And even just out of this is what baffled me, is just out of pure political self-interest. You have Trump showing up at the Libertarian National Convention and pledging this thing
They
that
could have
Biden
taken it away from him.
Taken away, and nothing, crickets.
I think it's partly that even if it would benefit them, they're so full of spite they can't help themselves. Like this would benefit you at basically no cost. It'll be out of the headlines in 48 hours, and it cuts Trump off at the knees. And it was the most obvious thing in the world, and they couldn't do it.
It's not like Biden was shy about using his pardon power. He could have just slipped it right in there,
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that's what a lot of what would happen, is that the goal would just to be like, it would just be petty. That's how politicians are generally, is like, how do I just make the other guy look like a fool by stealing the thunder,
No.
But just to your point, though, is that I totally agree. Like, I've been following this since the beginning. Like I was here, like Silk Road was one of the very first things that I heard about that like when I got into Bitcoin, and which was just fascinating to me because I was all in like the BitTorrent corners of the internet, and like, you know, I was kind of going down the rabbit hole of kind of the cypherpunk philosophy, kind of the anarchist philosophy and Rothbard and all of this stuff. But I was also like a deep nerd, and I was digging into the history of the internet, and I was seeing these things that I had thought were toys my whole life in a completely new light. It's like in a completely new light. Like I was like, this is just where I got free songs and I downloaded movies online. And it's like, no, this like fundamentally broke industries. This changed the business model of media everywhere in the world. Like this created history. Like this was not just a thing that I used that I thought was cool. And when all of this happened, there were always these conversations that, you know, maybe one day Bitcoin would be big enough and important enough that it would catch people's attention, and Ross's case would get another light shined on it and something could happen. But it was always this distant, crazy, bonkers future that was clearly never going to get here. Like it was just our way to have a conversation that wasn't the dude's going to die in a brick. Box.
That's it's an underrated point because it so much focus goes towards the drugs and the murder for hire and all the salacious drama around it. But yes, bootstrapping Bitcoin alone is a huge accomplishment for the Silk Road that is part of Ross Ulbricht's legacy now. And for a long time, Bitcoiners didn't like to talk about it, but that really did kind of level up Bitcoin because it proved that it could be used as a currency. And then also just kind of proving that you could use technological solutions to subvert laws that are unjust, which libertarians and crypto anarchists believe the drug war to be. And I think that entire movement has only grown since the Silk Road, and the Silk Road is a real inflection point there, that we're now seeing everything just like burst out of control. Like the censorship machine and everything made its last gasps during COVID, I believe. And now, even if they wanted to, there's the technology exists where it's really impossible to like crack down at scale. And the Silk Road was kind of one of the first demonstrations of that ability.
I think there's also a bit of something poetic in kind of the pure demonstration that the government was the source of violence in the situation, and that they were the reason that these people thought their lives were over and pushed them to attack each other and go after each other when the vendors like started going crazy after the theft happened. Is that if this was left to if Carl Force and Sean Bridges weren't there and they hadn't taken over the admin and started blackmailing and extorting people and saying, we're like anybody behind the DPR account or these vendor accounts or whatever, they genuinely believed they had a gun to their head. Because somebody was saying, the government is going to kill you. I'm going to make sure it happens. I'm going to point them at you. Pay me money. Give me Bitcoin. Had none of that happened, the entire situation would have remained peaceful. What happened was a whole bunch of violent, corrupt officers inserted themselves into the situation, sowed discord, sowed violence, started blackmailing and extorting people, and making all of these normal people on this website believe that their lives were over unless they did something terrible.
Yeah.
Like, what a better example of, like, you wonder where all of the violence in the quote unquote drug market comes from. Yeah. Everyone believes they have a gun to their head. Because they do. Because the government is holding that gun.
Yes, well, and also, obviously, the criminal organizations that thrive in those sorts of markets. And like, that's the conversation that I sort of hope that this can now begin to force. I've been waiting for this conversation to be forced for a while now, and it hasn't, unfortunately. But what are we going to do about the fact that drugs, and yes, really harmful drugs exist. Because as you mentioned at the top there, Guy, like we've tried pouring the $1 trillion+ in, we've tried pouring all these militarized resources into prosecuting this. It seems like the path forward is like more of that. Now it's like we're going to go to all out war with the cartels. I heard they're issuing letters of marque and reprisal to go like capture cartel leaders. I remain really skeptical that is going to work, just because it's like a repeat we've seen over and over again. Every time they cut off the head, they've done the decapitation strategy where they cut off the head of the snake, the cartel leader, and then a new worse one like El Chapo emerges. They take him out, his sons take over, and then you can go and read the DEA documents, and his sons are like, okay, it's time for us to pivot to fentanyl now. That's the next evolution of our business model. So it's like it's a whack-a-mole game. Every time they try, a new hydra emerges, and our choices are basically at this point the online black markets as a distribution platform, the cartels. I would say in that dichotomy, we want the online black markets, but there still is another option, which is to like be adults about this and figure out a way to cope with the bad side effects of drug abuse and kind of start to lift it out of that black market.
I was just writing something the other day about, and I guess I fell into this trap a little bit when I was younger, but when you're young, let's say 14 through 20, you think you have all the solutions to the world's problems because you don't realize the world has tried all your solutions already because you're too young to have been around to know that. So and it kind of reminds me about people talking today. Well, we'll just get tough on it. And I want to say, where have you been the past 50 years? You think nobody thought of that? I think that's the thing that they've been doing. It's like, if only we could send money to these poor countries, maybe they'd become rich. I hear that, but that really has been done, and it's only done harm. It has not done good. So it is a little discouraging that it seems like we're back at square one. But I think the argument that they make, and I'll say this as we kind of wrap up,
that's the flip side of Trump, though. Okay, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that a place like Singapore, they say, look, they don't have a drug problem. And why is that? Because they're vicious and ruthless. Why can't we be like that?
Why can't we be like Singapore? I mean, I guess we could be like Singapore. They've got a quite robust surveillance state there, and it does require trading away a lot of liberty. So I mean that they could give it the old college try. On the other hand, kind of what I was raising before about the fact that these technological solutions to subvert those kind of controls already exist. Scaling up Singapore to a nation of 300+ million that's going to be quite the endeavor. But what I was going to say about Trump, Tom, was like on the flip. That's the flip side of Trump to me, is like he opens up some new possibilities, but also he's really good at reframing old ideas that have been tried before as something like novel and exciting, whether it's this or tariffs and a host of other kind of bad economic ideas.
Guy, any final word?
Yeah, I would say, just on the Singapore thing, I don't know much about the situation, but I bet it's not as simple as presented. And we've been trying that route for a long time, and all we've done is, I would suspect this means we need a highly efficient and highly effective and a competent government. And I think if you're making that argument, you got an uphill battle to prove that to me, because I'm not. Where are you talking about? Where the hell have you been? But in the context of like what's possible, I would love to. I think I literally think, and I don't even like drugs. I don't like the idea of my kids. I have no desire for this to be more a part of society. In fact, the reason I believe the drug war is a failure is because it has caused this problem to get so much worse. And you cannot, I don't care what it is, you put it on a long enough timeline. If you increase the market incentive for something, you will increase more of that thing. It is the Cobra problem all over again. And I don't care how much it might look like it works for 10 years. Socialism usually looks like it works for a short period of time before you run out of other people's money. And at the end of the day, I think there is one sustainable solution, is to stop introducing violence into situations that you simply subjectively disagree with. And I think the drug problem gets better. It does not mean that we like drugs. It does not mean that we are... I can say that I don't believe something should be illegal, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to go do it. That doesn't mean, like, I don't think prostitution should be illegal, but I'm not going to say, yeah, everybody go, let's hire prostitutes for our birthdays and, for my kids' birthdays, let's get a prostitute in here. Those are not the same thing. Saying don't shoot people in the head over it is not the same as invite it to a kid's birthday party. And this is the level of obnoxiousness that this argument becomes, because if you don't like something, you're supposed to believe that it's worth killing people over. And I disagree with that fundamentally. And I genuinely think, and I kind of think we have a lot of evidence to support this, is that the solution to the drug problem is the Silk Road, is the solution to the violence and to the unbelievable detriment of society is not to support it, is not to hail it as some great thing. And I think that's one of the things, is that drugs get like marijuana almost has this air of like you're cool and it's a good thing. And I don't think that's the case either. And I think a lot of it is that this rebel mentality actually becomes a reflection of the overreaction, is that when you say you should kill people over it and say, well, that's wrong, you say well, then suddenly you have to take the opposite stance. You have to dig in your heels and you say we should all smoke marijuana. And I don't think that's the case. And I think that is a reflection of the fact that our policies and our situation and how we deal with it and our culture around it is so poisonous, specifically because of how the government has created this environment. And I believe violence is not the answer to almost any problem. Violence is the answer basically to the problem of violence. And drugs are not violence. People taking responsibility for their own lives, for their own actions, for their own health is the only way forward. And you have to treat people like adults before they actually have the incentive to be adults. And I don't see any sustainable way out of this. I would love to see Trump change his tune on that. I don't think so. But had it not been Trump, there would have been, where would the progress for this have been? Like, we're just going to get more of the same. Like, so really it was either the situation that we have and everything continuing to get worse, or Trump is crazy enough to actually do a couple of things that are actually different and try something. No hope, not much hope for the drug problem, but I don't know. Like I said, crazier things have happened.
Guy, what's a website for you we can give people?
BitcoinAudible.com is mostly just like a front end. We're redoing a ton of the back end right now, so it'll have a whole new website soon. But if you just find me, the guy Swann, on Twitter and Bitcoin Audible on my podcast feed, you can basically find everything from there. I'm pretty active on Twitter and Nostr, and obviously the feed, I post stuff like every other day. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And Zach, we all know Reason.com. Is there anything else you want to give us?
Yeah. I co-host every week a podcast called Just Asking Questions. And one of the recent episodes pertains directly to this. I interviewed Angela McCardle, who I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, she does absolutely deserve credit for taking this over the finish line. It's been something that the libertarian movement has been passionate about for over a decade since he's been incarcerated. Obviously, Lynn, you mentioned, worked tirelessly this entire time to free her son. And then, Angela, in a very savvy way, extracted this from Trump, in the spirit of this issue being something that has united all the different factions of libertarians. I've never talked to a libertarian who's like, no, Ross should remain in prison for the rest of his life. She recognized that was an issue that, crosses all those factions. So I want to, give her credit where credit is due for her part in making that happen. And also recommend the conversation I had with her on my show, Just Asking Questions, which is every Thursday.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll make sure these links are all available at tomwoods.com/2600, as well as in the video description. Well, thanks to both of you gentlemen very much for your insights and all the details we got today about Ross's case.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having us.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Make yourself and those you love less vulnerable to the regime, both mentally and physically. Get more forbidden information at tomsfreebooks.com and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. See you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.